My name is Sarah Newman. I grew up in a small town in Kansas, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names and secrets. My life wasn't extraordinary by any means. It was plain, routine, predictable. I worked at the local library, surrounded by dusty books and the quiet hum of a small-town rhythm. My days were filled with cataloging, helping kids with their school projects, and chatting with the occasional visitor who lingered over a cup of coffee in the reading corner. I liked the simplicity of it all. I was practical, independent, and unshakably skeptical. Growing up, I had seen my mother cling to her faith like it was the last thing keeping her afloat after my father walked out on us. She would sit by the window with her Bible, whispering prayers into the void. I, however, believed in tangible things you could touch, hold, fix. God wasn't one of them. I carried this belief, or lack of it, through my teens and into adulthood. I didn't rely on anyone, not even for the little things. If a pipe burst, I'd grab the wrench. If the lights flickered, I'd climb the ladder and fix the bulb. It wasn't pride, really, it was survival. Depending on others had only ever brought disappointment. That night was no different. It was late, and the bulb on the porch had burnt out. I sighed, grabbed a replacement, and headed for the toolbox. The cool evening air wrapped around me as I positioned the ladder under the porch light. It wasn't the first time I'd done this. I climbed the steps with a casual familiarity, the metal creaking softly under my weight. As I reached the top and stretched out my arm to unscrew the burnt-out bulb, a moment of imbalance hit me. A fleeting, almost imperceptible wobble. But then it wasn't fleeting. My foot slipped. The world tilted. I remember the fall in fragments like a movie played in slow motion. The sharp clang of the ladder hitting the ground. The rush of air against my skin. The sickening crack as I hit the wooden porch floor. And then pain. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. A jarring, electrifying pain that shot through my entire body. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the stillness that followed. The silence that swallowed me whole. I don't remember the moments immediately after. What I do know, what they told me later, was that my neighbor Jim had heard the crash from his backyard. He found me sprawled on the porch, unresponsive, my body eerily still. He called 911, his voice cracking with urgency. At the hospital, the doctors worked tirelessly to save me. Machines beeped. Orders were shouted. Hands moved quickly, desperately. My body was there, lying on the sterile table, but I wasn't in it anymore. It's hard to describe the feeling of watching yourself from the outside. There I was, a lifeless figure on the hospital bed, surrounded by medical staff. But I wasn't in pain anymore. In fact, I wasn't feeling much of anything, just an odd sense of detachment, like I was floating in a dream. That was when it hit me. I wasn't alive. Not in the way I understood life to be. And yet I wasn't gone. I existed somewhere in between, in a liminal space that defied explanation. Before we continue this incredible journey, I want to invite you to be part of our growing community. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories that inspire and touch the soul. And here's something special. Leave a comment with your name and your city below. In the next video, we'll send a personalized message to some of you, and your name might just be mentioned in front of thousands of viewers. Imagine that. Your own moment to shine and be part of something truly special. Let's keep this connection alive. The moment I realized I wasn't in my body anymore, panic surged through me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I tried to move, but there was nothing to move. I had no weight, no substance. Yet I was still me. I hovered above the hospital bed, watching as the doctors and nurses worked frantically. One of them pressed their fingers against my wrist, shaking their head. Another checked the monitors. A voice, strained but authoritative, called out, "Time of death, 11:47 p.m. I was dead. The realization should have been terrifying. But it wasn't, not in the way I expected. There was no immediate fear, no agony. Instead, there was a silence, an eerie, all-consuming stillness. It felt like floating in the deepest part of the ocean, weightless, untethered. Then something shifted. The hospital room blurred. The sounds of the machines and frantic voices faded. I wasn't there anymore. It was as if I had been pulled away by some invisible force, yanked from the physical world into something else. Darkness. Not the kind of darkness that comes when you close your eyes, but an overwhelming void. Deep, endless, empty. I couldn't see, couldn't feel, couldn't hear. I was nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Then a sound. At first, it was nothing more than a whisper, faint and distant. But it grew louder, like echoes in a vast canyon. Voices speaking words I couldn't fully grasp. They were layered, overlapping, but they all spoke about me. She never believed. She rejected the truth. She thought she knew everything. The words struck like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. A dreadful sensation crawled through me, something beyond fear. An awareness that I had no control, that whatever was happening was far greater than anything I could fight or explain. And then I started falling. It wasn't like falling through air. There was no wind, no rush, just a sickening pull, a downward spiral into something unseen. The voices continued, relentless, echoing through the void. My mind screamed for it to stop, but I had no voice, no power. Then a shift, a change in the air, in the space around me. A light appeared. At first, it was just a pinprick in the distance, barely perceptible against the darkness. But as I fell, it grew brighter, expanding, radiating something I had never felt before. It wasn't just light, it was presence. It was alive. The voices faded. The fear dissipated. And for the first time since leaving my body, I felt something real. Warmth. The light wasn't just in front of me, it was drawing me in, surrounding me, filling every corner of my being. I wasn't falling anymore. I was moving toward it, pulled by something stronger than gravity, more certain than anything I had ever known. And then I saw him. I couldn't process what I was seeing. The light wasn't just a glow or a distant radiance. It was alive, pulsing with an indescribable energy. And within it, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as it drew closer, the details became clearer. He wasn't just a presence, he was a person, dressed in white. His robe flowed like it was woven from the very essence of light. His face. It was both familiar and unlike anything I had ever seen. There was no harshness, no judgment, only an unfathomable depth in his eyes, as if he could see straight through me. To every thought, every wound, every secret I had ever buried. I wanted to speak, to ask where I was, to demand answers, but words failed me. Then he moved closer, and the warmth of his presence washed over me in waves. It wasn't just external. I felt it seep into my very being, dissolving every fear, every doubt. My entire life I had built walls around myself, convinced that vulnerability was weakness. But in that moment, those walls crumbled. I fell to my knees. Or at least it felt like I did. I wasn't even sure if I had a body in this place, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was in the presence of Jesus. The name had never meant much to me before. I had heard it in passing, seen it written on church signs, but I had never considered him real. Yet here he was, more real than anything I had ever known. His voice was unlike any voice I had ever heard. It wasn't just sound, it resonated through me like music that didn't need to be heard to be felt. Sarah, he said. It wasn't just my name. It was a calling, a reminder, as if he had known me long before I even existed. My soul trembled at the sound of it. Tears filled my eyes. I had spent my entire life thinking I was in control, that I didn't need anyone. But standing before him, I realized how small I was, how little I truly understood. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a whisper. Am I dead? His expression didn't change. There was no sadness, no pity, only a love so vast that it overwhelmed me. You were, he said simply. I didn't know what to say. I thought death was supposed to be the end, the final curtain. But this wasn't an ending. Felt like a beginning. Before I could ask anything else, the space around us shifted. The darkness that once surrounded me was gone, replaced by something I had no words for. It was a place, but not in the way Earth has places. It was vast, endless, filled with colors I had never seen before. Brighter, richer, alive. The very air vibrated with something beyond sound, beyond sight. I looked down and gasped. Beneath me, like a window into another world, was Earth. I could see the hospital, the doctors still working on my lifeless body, my neighbor Jim pacing the hallways, hands wringing in worry. I could see my mother, still awake, clutching an old photograph of us when I was little. She didn't even know yet. Then I saw something else. People. People I had hurt, people I had ignored, moments in my life where I had chosen anger instead of kindness, rejection instead of love. It was like watching my life through the lens of truth, stripped of excuses, stripped of the justifications I had told myself. I turned to Jesus, my chest tightening. Why are you showing me this? He didn't need to answer. Already knew. I had spent my life believing I knew everything. But here, in the presence of truth itself, I realized how blind I had been. And then he showed me something else. Something that made my soul tremble. The space around us shifted again, but this time it wasn't just glimpses of Earth. It was something far greater. A vast, endless expanse stretched before me, filled with light, with warmth, with something that felt like the very breath of creation itself. It wasn't just a place. It was a presence. A realm where time didn't exist the way it did on Earth. I could feel the weight of eternity pressing around me, but instead of fear, there was only awe. And then I saw them. Figures bathed in radiant light, more real than anything I had ever seen. They weren't just standing, they were worshipping. But it wasn't like the services I had occasionally glimpsed on TV or in passing by churches. This was different. Their very existence was worship. Every movement, every sound, every presence in that place resonated with a love so overwhelming that it made my knees tremble. It was then that I understood. I was standing at the threshold of heaven. I turned to Jesus, my voice barely a whisper. Am I supposed to be here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he extended his hand, and as I took it, everything changed. Visions poured into me. Not memories, but revelations. Truths I had spent my entire life avoiding. I saw my life not just from my own perspective, but from a higher one. I saw the moments where I had turned away from love, where I had let fear dictate my choices, where I had rejected him without ever realizing what I was truly rejecting. I saw how every wound, every scar, every ounce of bitterness I had carried was not because of him, but because I had refused to let him in. Tears streamed down my face. I had spent my entire life trying to control everything, convinced that I was strong enough on my own. But in that moment, standing before the very source of all life, I realized how desperately I had been searching for something without even knowing it. Then the vision shifted again. This time I saw people, so many people. Some were strangers, others familiar. They were lost, wandering, searching for something just like I had been. And then I saw myself, standing among them. My heart pounded. I knew what this meant. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice barely holding steady. Jesus looked at me, and I felt his words before he even spoke them. There is more for you to do. More. A realization settled over me. This wasn't the end. Never was. Suddenly I felt it, something pulling me back, tugging at the very fabric of my being. The light began to fade, the presence of heaven growing dimmer. My heart ached at the thought of leaving, but I knew I wasn't meant to stay. Not yet. Before everything vanished, before I was pulled away from that holy place, Jesus spoke once more. His voice wasn't just a sound. It was a promise. Tell them. And then the light was gone. I was falling. Not the terrifying, empty fall I had felt before. This time it was different. This time I knew where I was going. I gasped, my lungs burning, my body aching. Sounds flooded my ears. The beeping of machines, hurried voices, the weight of the world settling back onto me. I was back. I was alive. Before we continue, I want to invite you to be part of something special. Drop a comment below with your name and the city you're watching from. In our next video, we'll be sending out personal shoutouts to some of you, so your name might be mentioned in front of thousands of people. Imagine that. Your own moment to shine and be part of our amazing community. Also, if this story is touching your heart, don't forget to like the video. Your support helps us share these powerful messages with the world. The first thing I felt was pain. A deep, searing pain that jolted through every inch of my body like fire coursing through my veins. My chest ached with each breath, my limbs felt like lead, and my head throbbed as if I had been struck by lightning. The hospital lights above me were harsh, almost blinding. My vision blurred, shapes moving frantically around me. Voices, urgent, disbelieving, emotional, filled the room. "She's back," someone gasped. A nurse rushed out, calling for the doctors. More voices. Footsteps pounding against the linoleum. Machines beeping in a chaotic symphony. My body trembled as oxygen was forced into my lungs. I had been dead, but now I was alive. Memories crashed into me like a tidal wave. The darkness, the voices, the endless fall, the unbearable loneliness. And then the light, the warmth, the presence of Jesus. His words echoed in my mind, wrapping around my soul like an unbreakable bond. "Tell them." I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, my voice stolen by the experience I had just returned from. I wasn't the same person who had climbed that ladder just hours ago. Something inside me had shifted, an irreversible transformation that I couldn't yet understand. The doctor arrived, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Sarah, can you hear me?" I blinked, nodding weakly. "You were gone for 8 minutes," he said slowly, as if saying it out loud made it more real. "No pulse, no brain activity. We lost you. 8 minutes. An eternity." I looked down at my hands, pale and trembling. I could still feel it, the remnants of something beyond this world, the whisper of a reality more vivid than anything I had ever known. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. But how could I explain this? How could I look these people in the eye and tell them that I had stood in the presence of Jesus Christ? That I had seen heaven? That I had been shown the truth about everything I had spent my life rejecting? Would they even believe me? Or would they dismiss it as the hallucinations of a dying brain, as a trick of my subconscious? I thought of my mother, of the way she had held on to her faith even when life had crushed her spirit. Would she see this as proof of everything she had always believed? Or would she assume I was simply confused, shaken by trauma? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I couldn't ignore what had happened, and I couldn't go back to who I was before. I had been given a second chance, and now I had to figure out what to do with it. The days that followed were a blur of medical tests, whispered conversations, and looks of disbelief. I heard the doctors discuss my case in hushed voices outside my hospital room. 8 minutes with no oxygen to the brain. And she woke up as if nothing happened. "It doesn't make sense," another one murmured. "There should be brain damage. Memory loss. Something." But I was fine. More than fine. I was different. I sat in that hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The fall. The darkness. The terrifying endless void. And then the light. The presence of Jesus. His voice, his love, the overwhelming truth that had pierced through every wall I had ever built. And his final words. "Tell them." I knew what he meant. He wanted me to share what I had seen, to tell the world that he was real, that heaven was real, that eternity was real. But how could I? Would they even listen? The few people I had tried to talk to, the doctors, the nurses, just smiled politely, nodding the way you do when someone wakes up from a bad dream. "It's probably just a response to trauma," one of them had said gently. "Your brain trying to process everything." I wanted to scream, "No. You don't understand. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't some random hallucination. It was real." But I stayed quiet. The doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe my mind had conjured it up to protect me from the fear of dying. Maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. Then the nurse walked in. She was older, kind-eyed, the type of person who seemed to carry a quiet wisdom about her. She checked my adjusted the blankets, and then before leaving she hesitated. "I don't know what you saw, honey," she said softly, "but I want you to know. Sometimes people come back different for a reason. And just like that, the doubt shattered. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. Jesus had sent me back for a purpose. But knowing that and accepting it were two very different things. Because if I told the truth, if I stood up and declared what had happened, I knew what it would cost me. My friends would think I had lost my mind. The people who knew me, who had always seen me as strong, independent, logical, would laugh. They would say I had been brainwashed, that I had let fear manipulate me. But the truth was, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was free. And I had a choice. I could pretend nothing had happened. I could go back to my life, push it all down, move on as if I hadn't glimpsed eternity. Or I could do what he asked me to do. Tell them. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know if I had the courage to face the world with this truth. But deep inside, I knew one thing for sure. My life would never, ever be the same again. Before we move on to the final part of this incredible journey, I want to invite you to be part of something bigger. We don't make money doing this, we do it because we love it, because these stories need to be told. If you believe in what we're sharing, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. It might seem like a small thing, but it helps more than you know. It's how we keep this community growing. How we reach more people who need to hear these messages. So, if you feel connected to this, join us. Be part of our community. We're in this together. The day I was discharged from the hospital, the world felt different. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, but nothing around me looked the same. Not because the world had changed, I stepped outside, taking my first breath of fresh air since I had woken up. It should have felt liberating, but instead, I felt the weight of a responsibility I hadn't asked for. Tell them. Jesus' words echoed in my soul. I had spent my entire life avoiding faith, pushing away anything that required belief beyond what I could see, touch, or control. And yet, after what I had experienced, there was no denying it. He was real. Heaven was real. Everything I thought I understood about life and death had been shattered in an instant. But now I had a choice to make. I walked down the steps of the hospital, gripping the bag that held my discharge papers. I should have felt relief. Instead, a war raged inside me. If I told the truth, I knew what would happen. People would talk. They would whisper behind my back, shake their heads, call me delusional. But I couldn't not tell them. I had seen eternity. I had stood in the presence of the one who created me. And I had been sent back for a reason. I thought about my mother. She had spent years praying for me, believing when I had dismissed her faith as nothing more than wishful thinking. I had seen her suffer, seen her struggle. And yet, she had never let go of her belief in God. Now I understood why. I had spent so much of my life running from pain, from rejection, from needing anyone. I thought my independence was my strength. But in truth, it had been my prison. I had built walls so high that even God himself had to break through them to reach me. And he did. Not with force. Not with condemnation. But with love. I thought back to my time in that place. To the overwhelming warmth. The peace beyond understanding. And I realized I wanted that again. Not just for myself. For everyone. I pulled out my phone, staring at the blank screen. My heart pounded. Was I really going to do this? I took a deep breath. And then I started typing. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future would hold. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay silent. I had been given a second chance. And I wasn't going to waste it. This is just the beginning. What I have to share next is even more powerful. And I don't want you to miss it. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It's going to reveal something life-changing for you. And before you go, let's do something together. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in what we're sharing here, hit the like button and type Amen in the comments. Let's keep this blessing going. God is working in your life, and this is just the start. See you in the next video.